Welcome to Read Alchemy. For a long time, I was afraid to speak English. I could understand English. I could read English. I knew many grammar rules. I had studied hundreds of words, but speaking was different. Whenever someone spoke to me in English, I became nervous. I knew what I wanted to say, but I couldn't say it quickly. I would think about the sentence. Then I would question the grammar. Then I would search for the right word. And while I was thinking, the conversation would continue. Sometimes I would simply smile. Sometimes I would say yes, even when I had more to say. And sometimes I avoided speaking completely. The strange thing was that I wasn't afraid of English itself. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid that someone would notice my mistakes. I was afraid that people would think my English was bad. This is called the fear of judgment. Judgment means an opinion or decision that someone makes about you or your actions. For example, you might think, what will they think about my English? Will they laugh at me? Will they notice my pronunciation? What if I use the wrong word? These questions can create a lot of pressure, and pressure makes speaking even harder. I remember knowing a simple sentence but still being afraid to say it. The sentence was not difficult. The grammar was not difficult. The vocabulary was not difficult. The problem was confidence. Confidence means believing that you can do something successfully, but I had misunderstood confidence. I thought confident speakers never made mistakes. I thought they always knew the right word. I thought they could speak without hesitation. Later, I realized that this was not true. Good speakers can make mistakes too. The difference is that they don't stop every time they make one. They continue. They correct themselves. They explain their idea differently, and they keep the conversation moving. I had been doing the opposite. I was trying to create the perfect sentence before opening my mouth. That sounds careful, but in a real conversation, it creates hesitation. Hesitation means a pause because you are uncertain or unsure. For example, I wanted to answer, but I hesitated. She hesitated before giving her opinion. He spoke without hesitation. Hesitation is normal when you are learning, but too much hesitation can prevent you from practicing. And without practice, speaking doesn't improve. Another problem was pronunciation. I used to worry that people wouldn't understand me. If I wasn't sure how to pronounce a word, I avoided using it. If I thought my accent sounded different, I became uncomfortable. But having an accent is not the same as speaking badly. An accent is simply the way someone's pronunciation reflects their language background. The real goal is clarity. Clarity means being easy to understand. You don't need to sound exactly like a native speaker. You need to communicate your message clearly. That realization helped me relax. I also learned that simple English is powerful. I used to think that good English meant using complicated words, so I tried to make my sentences more sophisticated. Sophisticated means advanced, complex, or developed. But complicated English often made me slower. Then I started using simple sentences. Instead of searching for an impressive word, I used a word I already knew. Instead of creating a long sentence, I broke my idea into smaller sentences, and something surprising happened. I became easier to understand. I also became more confident. For example, instead of saying, I am experiencing considerable difficulty in expressing my thoughts, I could simply say, I'm having trouble explaining what I mean. Both sentences communicate an idea, but the second one is easier and more natural for everyday conversation. This taught me an important lesson. Speaking English is not a competition to use the biggest vocabulary. It is the ability to communicate an idea. Now let's learn some useful vocabulary from today's lesson. Nervous means worried or uncomfortable because you are uncertain about what will happen. Embarrassed means feeling uncomfortable because you think you have made a mistake or attracted unwanted attention. Judgment means an opinion formed about someone or something. Hesitate means to pause before doing or saying something. Confidence means belief in your own ability. Clarity means the quality of being easy to understand. Pronunciation means the way a word is spoken, and accent means a particular way of pronouncing words. Now let's practice some useful speaking expressions. I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure how to say this. Let me think for a second. I know what I mean, but I'm having trouble explaining it. I'm not sure if that's the right word. Let me try again. I made a mistake. That's not what I meant. What I mean is, these expressions are extremely useful. They allow you to continue speaking even when you don't know the perfect sentence. Now let's do our shadowing practice. Speak naturally after each sentence. I used to be afraid of making mistakes. I was worried about what people would think. Sometimes I knew the answer but didn't say it. I would hesitate before speaking. I wanted every sentence to be perfect. That made me speak more slowly. Then I realized something important. Mistakes are part of learning. I don't need perfect English to communicate. I need enough English to express my ideas. I can speak simply. I can correct myself. I can try again, and I can keep the conversation moving. Excellent. If you feel nervous when speaking English, remember this. Your goal is not to impress everyone. Your goal is to communicate. You don't need perfect grammar in every sentence. You don't need a perfect accent. You don't need to know every word. You need the courage to open your mouth and start speaking. Because confidence does not appear before practice. Confidence grows because of practice. And the more you speak, the more familiar speaking becomes. In the next chapter, we will talk about the moment I realized that my fear was actually stopping me from improving. That realization changed the way I practiced English. Keep listening, keep practicing, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. For a long time, I thought my English was the reason I couldn't speak confidently. I thought I needed more vocabulary. I thought I needed better grammar. I thought I needed to improve my pronunciation, so I kept studying, but something wasn't changing. I was learning more English, but I wasn't becoming more comfortable speaking it. Then I realized the real problem. I was using my fear as a reason not to practice. Every time I wanted to speak, I thought about making a mistake. Every time I made a mistake, I remembered it. And every time I remembered a mistake, I became more nervous about speaking again. It was a cycle. Fear created hesitation. Hesitation reduced practice. Less practice created less confidence, and less confidence created even more fear. The word cycle describes a situation that keeps repeating itself. For example, fear can create a cycle of avoidance. The word avoidance means staying away from something because you don't want to deal with it. And I was avoiding English conversations. I would avoid speaking to strangers. I would avoid asking questions. I would avoid giving my opinion. Sometimes I even knew exactly what I wanted to say, but I would remain silent. I thought silence would protect me from making mistakes, but silence was also protecting me from improving. That was the moment I understood something important. If I wanted to become comfortable speaking English, I had to become comfortable making mistakes. This does not mean that mistakes are the goal. The goal is communication. Mistakes are simply part of the process. Think about learning any physical skill. If you are learning to ride a bicycle, you may lose your balance. If you are learning to cook, you may make something that doesn't taste good. If you are learning to play an instrument, you will probably play the wrong note. You don't stop practicing because you made one mistake. You use the mistake as information. Language learning works the same way. A mistake can show you what you need to improve. It can show you a missing word. It can show you a grammar problem. It can show you a pronunciation problem. But most importantly, it gives you another opportunity to try again. I started changing the way I reacted to mistakes. Before, when I made a mistake, I would think, that was embarrassing. Later, I started thinking, good, now I know what I need to practice. That small change in attitude made a huge difference. The word attitude means the way you think or feel about something. A negative attitude can make practice feel like punishment. A positive attitude can make practice feel like progress. I also stopped comparing myself with fluent speakers. This was another major problem. I would listen to someone speaking English effortlessly and think, I will never speak like that. But I was comparing my practice stage with someone else's experience. That comparison was unfair. Instead of asking, why am I not fluent? I started asking, am I better than I was last month? That was a much better question. Progress is personal. Maybe today you can speak for 1 minute. Next month you may speak for 3 minutes. Maybe today you need to translate some words. Later, you may remember them automatically. Small improvements matter. Another important lesson was learning how to continue when I didn't know a word. Before, forgetting one word could completely stop me. I would think, I don't know this word. Then I would become silent. Now I use another strategy. I explain the idea using words I already know. For example, suppose I forget the word receipt. Instead of stopping, I can say, the paper they give you after you pay. The person will probably understand. Then I can learn the word afterward. This is called paraphrasing. Paraphrase means expressing the same idea using different words. Paraphrasing is a powerful speaking skill. You don't need to know every word to communicate. You need to know how to explain what you mean. Another useful expression is, what I mean is. You can use it when your first sentence was unclear. For example, I don't like this place. What I mean is, I don't like how crowded it is. You can also say, let me put it another way. This means you are going to explain the same idea differently. Another useful expression is, I can't remember the word. Then you can describe it. This keeps the conversation moving. Let's learn some vocabulary from today's lesson. Avoidance means staying away from something. Cycle means a situation that repeats itself. Attitude means your way of thinking or feeling about something. Effortlessly means without apparent difficulty. Comparison means examining two things to see how they are similar or different. Progress means improvement over time. Paraphrase means expressing an idea using different words. And react means to respond to something. Now let's practice these ideas through shadowing. I used to be afraid of making mistakes. That fear stopped me from speaking. I avoided conversations because I didn't want to feel embarrassed. But avoiding English didn't make my English better. It only made me more afraid. I realized that mistakes were part of the process. I didn't need to speak perfectly. I needed to keep communicating. If I forgot a word, I could explain it another way. If I made a grammar mistake, I could correct myself. If I didn't understand someone, I could ask them to repeat it. I could keep the conversation moving. Every mistake could become another opportunity to learn. Excellent. Now remember the most important idea from this chapter. You cannot become comfortable speaking English by avoiding uncomfortable situations. You have to slowly face them. Start small. Speak to yourself. Read a sentence aloud. Shadow a short conversation. Ask one question in English. Give one answer without translating everything. Then do it again tomorrow. You don't have to remove fear completely. You simply need to stop letting fear make every decision for you. The goal is not to become fearless. The goal is to become willing to speak, willing to make mistakes, willing to try again. That is where confidence begins. In the next chapter, we will look at the simple idea that changed the way I thought about English completely. It wasn't about speaking more complicated English. It was about learning how to communicate with the English I already had. Keep listening, keep practicing, and give yourself permission to make mistakes. After I stopped being afraid of mistakes, I discovered another important problem. I was still trying too hard to speak perfect English. I thought every sentence had to sound impressive. I thought I needed advanced vocabulary. I thought I needed complicated grammar to sound fluent. But the more I tried to sound advanced, the more nervous I became. Then I learned a simple idea. Clear English is more important than complicated English. This changed the way I spoke. Instead of searching for the perfect word, I started using the words I already knew. Instead of creating long sentences, I started with short ones. Instead of trying to sound impressive, I focused on communicating my message. That made speaking much easier. Imagine that you want to explain that you are very tired. You don't need an advanced word. You can simply say, "I'm really tired today." You could also say, "I didn't sleep well last night." "I'm exhausted. I need to take a break." These are simple sentences, but they communicate exactly what you need. The goal of speaking is not to show people how many words you know. The goal is to make your meaning clear. This also changed the way I learned vocabulary. Before, I used to memorize individual words. I would write a word in my notebook. Then I would write its meaning. Then I would move to the next word. But I discovered that words are much easier to use when you learn them as part of expressions. For example, don't just learn the word decision. Learn, "I need to make a decision. I haven't made a decision yet. That was a difficult decision." Now you have a pattern. You can change the pattern and create new sentences. "I need to make a plan. I need to make an appointment. I need to make a choice." This is much more useful than memorizing one isolated word. Isolated means separated from everything else. When vocabulary is isolated, you may recognize it but struggle to use it. When vocabulary is connected to useful expressions, it becomes easier to retrieve. This was another major change. I started learning phrases that I could actually imagine using. For example, "I'm not sure." "Let me think. That makes sense." "I know what you mean." "Could you explain that?" "I didn't catch that." "Give me a second." These expressions became tools. They helped me keep conversations moving. Before, if I didn't understand something, I would become silent. Now I could say, "Sorry, I didn't catch that." "Could you say that again?" That simple sentence gave me control of the conversation. I also learned how to ask for clarification. Clarification means making something clearer or easier to understand. You can say, "What do you mean? Could you explain that? Could you give me an example? Do you mean that?" These expressions are extremely valuable. You don't have to understand everything immediately. You can ask. That is what real communication looks like. Another important skill was learning how to recover. Sometimes you will say something incorrectly. Sometimes you will forget a word. Sometimes you will start a sentence and realize that it isn't going in the right direction. Before, I thought this meant I had failed. Now I simply corrected myself. For example, "I went there yesterday." Actually, I mean Monday. Or, "She is my colleague." Sorry, I mean my manager. Or, "I'll meet him tomorrow." No, Saturday. This is completely normal in real conversations. Native speakers correct themselves too. You don't need to stop speaking every time something isn't perfect. Just correct it and continue. This is called self-correction. Self-correction means noticing and fixing your own mistake. It is an important part of becoming a better speaker. I also started using English for things that were already part of my life. When I was cooking, I described what I was doing. "I'm cutting the vegetables." "I'm heating the pan." "I'm going to add some salt." When I was getting ready, I spoke about my plans. "I need to leave in 10 minutes." "I should take my keys." "I'll probably be back around 6. This practice was simple, but it made English feel less like a school subject. English became part of my everyday life, and that was the real change. I stopped waiting for opportunities to speak. I started creating opportunities. Let's learn some important vocabulary from today's lesson. Complicated means difficult to understand or deal with. Communicate means to express or share information. Isolated means separated from other things. Expression means a word or group of words used to communicate an idea. Clarification means additional information that makes something clearer. Recover means to return to a normal situation after a problem. Self-correction means fixing your own mistake. And opportunity means a suitable chance to do something. Now let's practice. Speak naturally after each sentence. I don't need complicated English to communicate. I can use simple words clearly. I can learn vocabulary through useful expressions. I can use sentence patterns in different situations. If I forget a word, I can explain the idea another way. If I don't understand something, I can ask for clarification. If I make a mistake, I can correct myself. I don't have to stop speaking. I can continue the conversation. I can use English while doing everyday activities. I can create my own opportunities to speak. The more I use English, the more natural it becomes. Excellent. Now remember this. You don't need to become a different person to speak English confidently. You don't need to know thousands of advanced words. You don't need perfect grammar. You need practical language that you can actually use. Learn a useful expression. Understand it. Listen to it. Shadow it. Change it. Use it in your own situation. Then use it again tomorrow. That is how English becomes active. And when English becomes active, speaking becomes easier. In the final chapter, we will bring everything together. We will create a simple daily routine for building speaking confidence. You will learn how to practice even when you don't have a speaking partner. And we will finish with a complete speaking and shadowing practice. Keep listening. Keep practicing. And remember, simple English spoken with confidence is far more powerful than complicated English that you are afraid to use. This is the final chapter of today's lesson. We have talked about fear. We have talked about mistakes. We have talked about confidence. And we have talked about using simple English instead of always trying to sound advanced. Now I want to show you what finally helped me become comfortable speaking English. It wasn't one magic trick. It was a simple routine that I repeated every day. The first thing I did was listen. I listened to English every day, even when I didn't understand every word. I stopped trying to understand everything. Instead, I focused on the general meaning and useful expressions. When I heard a sentence that sounded natural, I paid attention to it. Then I listened to it again. This gave me regular exposure to English. Exposure means having regular contact with something. The more English I heard, the more familiar the language became. The second thing I did was shadowing. I listened to a sentence and repeated it immediately. I tried to copy the speaker's pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. At first, it felt uncomfortable. I couldn't always keep up. Sometimes I missed words. Sometimes my pronunciation sounded strange to me, but I continued. The goal wasn't perfection. The goal was training. I wanted my brain and mouth to become comfortable working together in English. The third thing I did was speak to myself. Every morning, I described what I was doing. I'm getting ready for work. I need to make breakfast. I have a busy day today. I need to leave soon. These sentences were simple, but they were useful. I was practicing English that was connected to my real life. Later in the day, I talked about what had happened. I had a busy morning. I finished an important task. I talked to my friend. I was tired, but I got everything done. Then I talked about the future. I'm going to relax tonight. I might watch a movie. Tomorrow, I need to wake up early. This gave me practice with different situations and different sentence patterns. The fourth thing I did was stop translating everything. I didn't try to translate every thought perfectly. If I knew a simple English sentence, I used it. If I didn't know a word, I explained the idea differently. This was one of the biggest changes. I learned that communication is more important than finding the perfect word. Suppose I forget the word umbrella. I don't need to become silent. I can say, the thing you use when it's raining. The other person will probably understand. Then I can learn the word later. This skill gave me confidence. I knew that forgetting a word didn't mean the conversation had to stop. The fifth thing I did was practice useful expressions. Instead of memorizing random vocabulary, I focused on phrases that I could actually use. For example, I'm not sure. Let me think. I know what you mean. Could you say that again? Yeah, I didn't catch that. That's a good point. What do you mean? Let me explain. What I mean is. These expressions became automatic. I didn't have to build them word by word. They were ready when I needed them. That is what active language feels like. It is language that you can retrieve quickly when you need it. The sixth thing I did was accept discomfort. This was probably the hardest part. Speaking English didn't suddenly become easy. I still felt nervous sometimes. I still made mistakes. I still forgot words. But I stopped treating discomfort as a sign that I was failing. Instead, I started seeing discomfort as part of practice. If something feels difficult, it doesn't always mean you are doing it wrong. Sometimes it means you are learning something new. That changed my attitude completely. I stopped asking, why am I still making mistakes? I started asking, what can I learn from this mistake? That question helped me improve. Now let's build a simple routine you can follow. Spend 10 minutes listening to English. Choose a short and understandable piece of English. Then spend 10 minutes shadowing. Repeat useful sentences aloud. After that, spend 5 minutes reviewing vocabulary. Choose only a few useful words or expressions. Finally, spend 5 to 10 minutes speaking by yourself. Talk about your day. Talk about your plans. Describe what you are doing. Explain your opinion about something. This entire routine can take about 30 minutes. You don't have to do it perfectly. You simply have to do it consistently. Consistently means regularly and repeatedly over time. Consistency is more important than having one perfect study session. Now let's learn our final vocabulary. Exposure means regular contact with something. Routine means a regular sequence of activities. Intonation means the way your voice rises and falls. Retrieve means to bring information back from memory. Automatic means happening without conscious effort. Discomfort means a feeling of uneasiness or lack of comfort. Consistently means regularly over time. And attitude means the way you think or feel about something. Now let's finish with our final shadowing practice. Listen carefully, then speak. I used to be afraid to speak English. I was afraid of making mistakes. I was afraid of being judged. But I realized that avoiding English was not helping me improve. I started listening every day. I started shadowing useful sentences. I started speaking to myself. I stopped translating every thought. I learned to explain things when I forgot a word. I learned to ask questions when I didn't understand. I learned to correct myself and continue speaking. I stopped trying to sound perfect. I started trying to communicate clearly. I practiced a little every day. I became more comfortable with mistakes. I became more comfortable with silence. I became more comfortable with my own voice in English, and slowly my confidence began to grow. I didn't become fluent overnight. I simply became better than I was before. That was enough to keep going. Excellent. Now remember the most important lesson from this entire video. You don't need to wait until you feel confident before you speak. Speaking is what helps you build confidence. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need a perfect accent. You don't need an enormous vocabulary. You need practice. You need patience. And you need the willingness to keep going when something feels difficult. If you studied English for years but still feel afraid to speak, don't assume that you have failed. Maybe you simply need to change the way you practice. Use the English you already know. Listen every day. Shadow natural sentences. Speak about your life. Learn vocabulary and context. Ask questions. Make mistakes. Correct yourself. Try again, and keep going. One day, something very small will happen. Someone will ask you a question in English. You will understand it. You will think about your answer, and you will simply speak. No panic, no long translation, no fear of every mistake, just a normal answer. That moment may seem ordinary, but you will know how much work it took to reach it. So don't wait for confidence. Build it. Don't wait for perfect English. Use the English you have, and don't be afraid to speak. Because every sentence you say is another step toward the speaker you want to become. Keep listening, keep shadowing, keep speaking, and I'll see you in the next lesson.